Hey guys, this is John. Happy Super Bowl Sunday to everyone, or just regular Sunday/Monday if you're outside the US or don't care about football whatsoever. So, I have an idea for a new series on chess.com, and that is climbing the rating ladder, except with tactics. So, what I did is I went into my settings and I reset my rating history for tactics. You can do this on chess.com. It's kind of a nice way to just hit the reset button and start with an entirely new slate. So previously I was about 27 to 2800 in my tactics training category, but now we're starting as a newbie at 1200. And I'm going to explain my thought process as I try to solve my way up. And hopefully I can take this pretty far and maybe even get to like 3000 or something. Okay, so I'm probably going to keep these videos fairly short, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, but I hope to be posting them consistently. Okay, so let's get started. Our very first problem with our 1200 rating. So black to move. White has just played the rook over to f1. Now, when you're solving tactics and really any position, you should be looking at your forcing moves first. That means your checks and your captures. And here, before I even look at the forcing moves, I also try to size up the material. And I noticed that black is down a ton of material. White has 2 extra rooks. So if we don't have checkmate, we better have a draw at the very least. Otherwise, white's material superiority will be fatal for us. So it looks like white's king is pretty open. They don't have a g-pawn. So immediately my eye is drawn to queen g4 check, forcing king h1, and then queen f3 check. That would force the king back to g1. And then we have a chance at a perpetual check with queen g4, just repeating. And barring anything substantial that I could do alternatively, I'm going to go with that continuation because I would be pretty happy with the draw here. I think with the queen and the bishop and f2 being covered, there's not any chance of anything better, so we should probably go with this. And note I'm going queen g4 instead of queen g5 because I want to be able to check on f3 after this. So queen g4, queen f3, go back here, and looks like we solved it. All right, 100%. So yeah, just a classic type of draw with a queen on an open king. You see this pattern come up in games. Often it'll be prefaced by a sacrifice on g2, so maybe black gave something up to reach this position. Looks like people haven't done too well in this problem. You can see the stats over here. Only 7.6% of people have solved this. I'm a little surprised. Maybe people have been looking for something more complicated and try to find a win for black. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're again playing black. White retreated their attacked queen. So here, the material balance is even. I'm able to get that at a glance, but for many of you, you might have to actually sit there and take a little bit longer to count the material. One trick I have for that purpose is to use a lot of canceling. So instead of like going through and saying, okay, a pawn is 1, a bishop is 3, a knight is also 3, a queen is 9, and trying to add up all the material, get in the habit of canceling white for black pieces. So here we're so not very far removed from the opening, so it's pretty easy to see that the only thing that's been exchanged is 2 pair of pawns, or 1 pair of pawns rather. 1 pawn for black, 1 pawn for white. But you should employ canceling as a technique to quickly count material, get in that habit. So queen d3, white retreating that queen. We could try to attack it with knight b4 or knight e5. I don't see any forcing moves of note. We don't have any checks or captures, in fact. So we can already go on to other moves to consider. And knight e5 and knight b4 are big threats. So how do we narrow it down between those two? Well, let's consider what white would do after we played knight e5 or knight b4. If knight e5, that hits the queen, but I think white has a lot of available squares. Queen e2, maybe queen g3. Also, they can insert a capture on d7, so bishop takes d7 check. And after, let's say, queen takes d7 and the queen moves, let's say to e2, I don't see a good follow-up reply for black. We're only attacking with 1 knight. All these pieces are still stuck on the king side, undeveloped still. So I'm not thinking that continuation is promising. Now let's look at knight b4. So The immediate advantage I see with knight b4 is that not only are we attacking the queen, but we're also attacking that pawn on c2. And regardless of whether white moves the queen after knight b4, or if they insert bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, there's nowhere white can move the queen where they will also be defending that pawn. So knight b4 attacks two things, one of which will be hard for white, if not impossible, to defend, whereas knight e5 only attacks the queen, so it's a little more one-dimensional. So I'm liking knight b4. And again, given the fact that black doesn't have many other pieces developed or in aggressive spots, this is looking like the move we're going to play. So let's go ahead and do it. Yep, white takes on d7. King takes would needlessly expose our king to a check on b5, and also we want to preserve castling, so we're going to take with the queen. White dropped the queen all the way back to f1, but this doesn't interfere with our plan to take on c2. All right, so we passed that one. So this one I think was pretty straightforward because you don't have too many alternatives to the solution. Although I could see some people going wrong with knight e5. I think that's a move some would consider pretty heavily and maybe even play. Let's keep going. Again playing black, and white has played d7, threatening to queen. This one looks a little like the first one in that I think black is in some trouble here if they don't give checkmate, win material, or force a draw, something along those lines. That's a pretty powerful pawn. About to get a queen. All right, so forcing moves. We have some checks, like bishop h2, queen g2, or queen h1, which we can probably rule out right away. White's just taking in both those cases. We also have rook takes f2, taking the bishop and threatening queen g2 mate. So those are the set of moves that I'm considering. Bishop h2 check looks most promising to me because if white were to take it with their king, we have rook takes f2 check as a follow-up, and then we're driving the king out to g3 or back to g1. In both cases, we have queen g2, I believe, or rook g2 in the case of king g3. So let's calculate that line. So bishop h2 check, king takes h2, rook takes f2 check. If king g1, there's queen g2 mate, so probably king g3. And then I'm just debating which way to check on g2, either with the rook or with the queen. If queen g2 check, king h4, we're very close to checkmating white, but note that we can't play g5 because this is pinned. The g-pawn is pinned, that is, because of white's queen. So we need something a little bit different. Bishop h2 check, king takes h2, rook takes f2 check, king g3. What about rook g2 check? Probably king h4 still, maybe king f4 out into the open, but king h4 looks safer. And once more, I don't see any follow-up for black. Our queen can't easily reach the king side. We could maybe try some slow move like, I don't know, queen c5 perhaps, trying to threaten queen g5 checkmate or queen f2. Maybe that's okay, although d8 queen, yeah, we do have queen f2 in that case. So could that be? So once again, from the beginning, the line I'm looking at is bishop h2 check, king takes h2, rook takes f2 check, king g3, and now this somewhat slow-looking idea, rook g2 check, king h4, and then just trying to move the queen. I was suggesting queen c5, because that gives us access to f2, g5, or e7. And maybe white queening doesn't even matter because of all those threats. That looks good. I don't see a defense for white, in fact. Now, our work is not done just because we've calculated that line. We would also have to look at bishop h2 check, king f1. I mean, what happens if white just declines the bishop, right? There we do have queen h1 check. And our rook does a good job of controlling e2. So white can't escape with their king. They'd have to play bishop g1, but then we checkmate them. Queen takes g1. So I'm going to spend just a little more time calculating that principal variation now that I covered the king f1 move to make sure that I'm getting this right. I mean, if you had this position in the game, you'd absolutely want to double, triple check your lines because this could be the game right here. So bishop h2 check, king takes h2, rook takes f2 check. We know king g1 fails to queen g2 mate, so king g3 is forced. And then I was advocating rook g2 check. I do have to look at king f4 still. That's a move I need to consider. But let's say king h4. On king h4, I'm considering queen c5. And I don't see how white survives. I don't think even queening their pawn is going to matter. I mean, because we have that queen f2 check move. White would be forced to play queen g3. Then we take the queen. Queen takes g3 mate. So backing up a little bit, what if after rook g2, white goes king f4 out into the open? Well, we have some checks like queen to c7 check. Wish I could play g5, but I can't. Again, there's that pin. So we have queen c7 check. They could play maybe king e4 in that case. Queen c6 check. Perhaps some chances of a perpetual. King e5. I don't like the fact that our rook is a little far removed, though. I don't feel like black is participating with the rook in that case. So could king f4 be the refutation of this rook g2 check plan? Okay, I have an alternative idea. Let's go back to queen g2 check. So from the beginning here, bishop h2 check, king takes h2, rook takes f2 check, king g3, and now queen g2. More forcing because king f4 is ruled out. Black has a rook on f2 guarding that f4 square. So king h4 would be required then. Now that's the position I might have given up too early on earlier. But black does have some tempting possibilities there. Like what about just rook f3 in that case? Attacking the white queen and threatening queen g3 checkmate. Also threatening queen f2. I think there, white would be obliged to give up their queen for the rook. So queen takes f3. But then after queen takes f3, we've got the threat of queen f2 mate. So white does not have time to queen their pawn successfully. That's probably winning. There's even other threats like g5 check, king h5, queen f7. And if you're lost by now, that's fine. This one is harder than the last two we've looked at, for sure. So what we have here, I'm going to give this line one more time just to be clear. So bishop h2 check, king takes h2, rook takes f2 check, king g3, queen g2 check, king h4, and I'm suggesting this quiet move, rook f3, because black is threatening several things. I think white would be required to play queen takes f3 then, and then queen takes f3, threatening queen f2 mate. If rook d2, let's say, then we've got mate in 2. g5 check, king h5, queen f7 checkmate. All right, I think I've done my due diligence and looked through all of the relevant lines. So let's play this out. Hope it works. So bishop h2 check. Take this. Okay, here's where I was mentally debating between rook g2 and queen g2. I think queen g2 is better due to that king f4 resource. Okay, now the quiet move, rook f3. All right, we passed. Rook f3 was the toughest move there at the end because for a second it looked like white was getting away. I even initially dismissed this continuation because of the fact that I thought the pawn was promoting. So we passed this one. Looks like this one does stump quite a few people, 40% pass rate. Average time to solve it, 2 minutes. Yeah, there's just several ways you could go wrong here, especially like right here after king g2, because rook g2 I think also looks very tempting, but queen g2 just narrows the options. White can't go king f4 in that case. So king h4 and rook f3. Yeah, and this is where the problem ended, but if we continue a little bit, not sure how I can make... I'm actually going to refrain from making arrows until I can figure that out, maybe for the next video. But if queen takes f3 had been played, queen takes f3, and if white were to promote that pawn, queen f2 checkmate. Okay, let's solve a couple more here. Black to move, playing bishop d5. Position not far from the opening. Material-wise, black has an extra minor piece. Looking at forcing moves, we have pressure down the e file. Queen takes e7 would just result in the queen getting captured, either with the knight or the rook. So I can dismiss that pretty fast. Other checks, bishop b5 doesn't really make much sense. A line I'm looking at right away is knight takes d5. That's a capture, another forcing move. Queen takes d5, and then bishop e4, skewering the queen to the rook in the corner. And I like that because we are down material. We'd love to get some of that back. I think black could play aggressively with something like queen a2, but bishop takes a8. If they give a check on a1, we're just scampering away to d2. I don't think that's a big deal. But I get nervous when the solution seems to come too easily, because compared to that last one, this one looks a lot less involved already. Any other things we could look at? I mean, bishop takes f6, also a capture, but I think they just take with the knight. And this rook guards the bishop, so we're not winning on e7. Yeah, I'm liking knight takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop e4. Looks like it'll just win that rook in the corner, and I think we're happy. Black's forces are pretty disorganized, and they've got a serious king safety issue. So I'm going to play this. Bishop e4. Yep, there black goes, queen a2. That's a move you have to look at because they're putting their queen right next to your king, trying to create counter threats. But no fear, let's just take it. There we go. All right, we went up a few rating points. So 60% pass rate on this one. Yeah, I think the black queen on b7 and the rook in the corner, and also this bishop on d5, black has a lot of material on that same diagonal. And since we have the opportunity to immediately eliminate that light square bishop, it's nice to look at that right away. We have a light square bishop remaining, and they don't. So that should be a cue that black is vulnerable on that diagonal. Okay. Next one. Ooh, this one looks really easy. White played rook f6. So white didn't even play a check or anything. We have a mating net, which maybe some of you have seen before. It's not like a super common mating net, but this is a pattern that might emerge in your play. Here, black's knight is doing a good job of controlling h1 and f1. Also, we've got this pawn on f3, aggressively placed, close to white's king. If we're looking at checks, we've got a lot to consider. Rook d1, knight e2, and also the move that just appears to win, rook g2 checkmate. Because, again, we're controlling those two flight squares. If we were to check on d1 instead, you could consider that to be kind of a redundant check because we're covering squares that are already covered by the black knight, h1 and f1. We don't need more coverage of those two. So if we can check in a different way, though, we might get the job done. Note that f2 check is met by rook takes f2, so rook g2 checkmate is the solution. I'm surprised we gained that many points because that one is very basic. But there you see the pass rate. Maybe a lot of people are just playing a check instinctively, like rook d1 check or something, and not playing the right check. So when you have equivalent looking options, you have to work hard to try to narrow it down within those. And don't just play a check for the sake of playing a check. Actually make your check purposeful if you're going to give one at all. Okay, let's keep going. Rook g5. Well, why can't I take that rook? If I take it with the pawn, I get mated on h7. So queen h7 checkmate. But I do notice that we have the other option of taking. So queen takes g5. If we take that way, just changing up the move order a little bit, then white cannot respond with f takes g5 because they're pinned here. Note we've got this rook on f8. And if they take with the queen, we can take back with the h-pawn. No checkmate on h7. And looking at the material that would be remaining, black would just be up a pure rook in that case. Queen takes g5, queen takes g5, h takes g5. Yeah, we're a rook to the good. Our king safety is a little questionable. I mean, white could continue with rook h1, but I don't think they're even threatening much. Bishop h7, our king could always get to f7. Other forcing moves are not really to be had. I mean, bishop takes f4, queen takes d4. There's no checks here. White's too well fortified on f4 to make that work. We're not going to give up our queen for the knight for no reason. So queen takes g5 it is. This move I didn't consider. Maybe I should have because it is a forcing move in reply. But given that we can just take it back with our rook, and after queen takes f7 check, king takes f7, f takes g5, we'll still be up a piece. That's good enough for me. All right, so white is giving up the queen. But that's the end of the problem, and we passed. So looks like white's previous move, rook g5, just loses material. Although white might already be in bad shape here if the rook has no squares. Maybe rook takes d5 could be played. Because then if e takes d5, queen takes d5 check, forks the king on g8 and the rook on a8. Okay, I'm going to do one or two more. We'll see how tough these are. Knight b6. So here we've got an imbalance. White has two rooks. Black has a rook and two knights. Both sides have king safety issues. Black's got this queen lurking very close to my king. But then again, black's king is pretty open. Time is of the essence in these types of positions with mutual attacks on the kings. So looking at the checks, I see rook e8 check. I also see queen c5 check, which would be a fork on the king on c8 and the rook on f8. There's also queen g4, but queen g4 I don't like as much because our queen is not as close to that black king. Queen c5, we get closer, and we create a threat on f8, so that's at the top of my list right now. If queen f8, or queen c5 check rather, probably they would run to b7. That looks like the safest of the squares. If I take on f8, then queen a1 check, king d2, knight c4 check, king d3. Looks like we're escaping. The only thing that maybe we'd have to be concerned about is, from the beginning, queen c5 check, king b7, queen takes f8, and then kind of the slower move, knight c4, trying to take away the d2 flight square. But I suspect we're going to have a checkmating net of some sort. I mean, we've got our queen and both rooks participating. It's hard to believe there wouldn't be a checkmate there. But just to be safe, maybe we should look at queen c5 check, king b7, and then rook e7 as well. Then black can block with a knight, though. So knight, let's say 8 to d7. They can maybe even just go to the corner with their king, although I could take the knight on b6 in that case. So queen c5 check, king b7, rook e7 check, knight 8 to d7. And where's my follow-up? Note that black controls the d5 square twice with their queen and their knight, so I don't like moving there. Yeah, I don't see a good follow-up. So queen c5 check, king to b7, queen takes f8, knight c4. Let's try to calculate a forced mate then. Rook e7 check. Okay. And then if king comes up to b6, I think we have queen d8 check, which takes away the flight square on a5. And I'm certain that will be winning because they would have to go to c5 or c6. Yeah, we've got way too much stuff firing at them for that to work. So queen c5 check, king b7, queen takes f8, knight c4, and then, yeah, we were saying rook e7. If they go to the corner, king a8, it's important that we have queen f3 check. Cutting them off along the 7th because of our rook on e7, they would have to play knight c6, and then queen takes c6. That's mate next move. King b8, queen b7. So that checks out. So in this one, you have to kind of rein in your instincts to just play queen c5 right away. Because yes, that will win the rook. But after queen c5, king b7, queen takes f8, knight c4, it's not completely clear yet that white will win because black has a mating net of their own. So we want to go that extra mile and just make absolutely certain that we can win in that case. And I think we can with rook e7. Nothing I've calculated so far says any different. Even as a backup, I could always play, like after rook e7, king d1, followed by king e2. So I see a possible escape route for my king. So I'm giving myself a few outs if necessary. Like if I just completely miscalculated something and I get to this position, a couple moves into the problem, and I'm like, oh no, I missed this move that black could play, at least I see a way out, a backup option. So let's do this. Black is running there. All right, no fear. Let's grab this. Oh, that's it. Yeah, I thought they might continue with knight c4, but this is the end of the problem. And again, if queen a1 check, king d2, black has another check on c4, but king d3, white's up way too much material, and black is soon running out of checks. So, yep, on knight c4, though, rook e7 looks like it would take care of business. Let's do one more to wrap up this session. I'm at 1458. I made some good progress. Let's try to get this last one. So bishop h5. Notice that black's king is somewhat strangely placed on h6. I don't think that's a square black would like to have their king. Our king comparatively is safe. Not that much material left on the board. We're in an endgame. It's even material. So here, white's knight is nicely supported by this h4 pawn, so black is not threatening to take it. I look to mating nets here because I mentioned that black's king is already awkwardly placed, and the only flight square for that black king is g7. So the g7 square. Playing my knight to e6 would cover that square, but I like my knight on g5. As I said, it's supported by this pawn. Our rook isn't appearing to do anything. Certainly I would look at rook takes c6, just grabbing a pawn and threatening another pawn. But I'm sensing that we can play for mate. And a knight plus a major piece, that's a really good attacking unit. You know, the example that's often given is a knight plus a queen. You'd love to have that attacking unit because they don't reproduce any squares. They're unique pieces that move in different ways, so they don't reproduce squares, unlike a queen and a bishop. And a knight and a rook are also good too. So are a rook and a bishop, by the way, for the same reason. So the move I'm looking at is rook d7, which simply threatens rook takes h7 checkmate. And since rook d7 also takes away black's ability to play rook b7 as a defense, because we would just take the rook, I don't see how black is getting out of this. I mean, they have a spite check on h1 they could throw in, but just king takes h1, that's over. We might want to glance at stalemate tricks, but there's too much material on board for black to even think about a stalemate. They've got a pawn, c pawn, bishop that can move. So rook d7, we're going to pass up that pawn. We're playing for checkmate, baby. Yeah, rook b7. Let's take this guy. All right, black trying to create an escape square for their king, but we take the pawn and h5 is covered. So this is another pattern that if you see often enough, your eyes will be immediately drawn to the way to checkmate. So a knight supported by a pawn like this, very close to an enemy king. If we can coordinate with our major piece, whether it's a rook or a queen, we can possibly set up an inescapable mating net. And that's what you have here with rook d7. Okay, so we made some good progress here. You can see that we solved this amount of problems. How many problems is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 problems. And we went 8 for 8. And we pumped up our rating too. You know, I'm not like that big on rating in online play or solving tactics or whatnot. I think rating is just an indicator of your form, mostly how you're playing on that particular day. Of course, over time, your rating is going to tell you quite a lot, but don't worry too much about your rating if you're solving tactics, especially. The stat that I look for is pass percentage. I mentioned this before in some of my other tactics training videos, but I don't care if a student is pretty high rated in tactics trainer. If they have a bad pass percentage, I'm gonna say to them that they're probably not taking their time as they should on these problems. So focus on accuracy. Try to get these problems right and really work them out in your head before you make that first move. Don't try to readjust halfway through the problem. You want to try to see as much as possible right away. All right, so I think this was good. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little video. And again, I'm going to be climbing the tactics training ladder, so stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching, guys. Leave me any feedback in the comments if you have it. Talk to you guys later. Bye.